Welcome to our weekly roundtable discussion by Law Enforcement Coaching, where each week we have unscripted conversations on relevant topics for law enforcement and our first responder community. This week we discuss fitness tips for first responders with strength and conditioning coach, Colten Pearce. We appreciate you tuning in and hope you find some useful insights and information from these discussions.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And to those tuning in, thank you for coming back and checking us out. We have another special guest with us today. We have Colten Pearce, and we're going to be talking about physical fitness and kind of going through the A, B's, and C's of your career from the beginning of what you should be doing to stay fit and in shape and moving it all the way through to retirement and how to stay in shape after retirement even. But before we get into all of that, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. Everybody should know Chris and I. We are the founders of Law Enforcement Coaching. And Greg, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Tami. Greg Nottingham, Chief of Staff here at Law Enforcement Coaching, and 30 plus years retired law enforcement. I retired as a sergeant from a local Arizona department, and now I'm just helping out here.
Thank you. And Colten, thank you for joining us. Tell us about yourself.
Okay, all right. Well, first things first, thank you for inviting me to do this. I typically don't like being kind of a focal point of anything, but it is an important message, so I'm glad you guys are tackling it. But I will give the disclaimer before I get into my background that I just want everyone to understand that I don't ever consider myself truly an expert in anything. It's a lifelong process of learning. So if anything, I consider myself a lifelong student. And I've just been fortunate throughout my career to have some really good mentors and go through a lot of different experiences in the fitness and strength and conditioning industry. So I've actually been in law enforcement for just officially retired from the community. I did about 25 years total. And during that tenure, I had a lot of fun, was able to do a lot of things, working on SWAT, working undercover, working in, robbery and homicide. And I finished my career as a training sergeant. So I was really able to focus on bringing the training that was needed to the agency that I was working with. And I was very lucky because my bosses at that time gave me a lot of autonomy to kind of guide and direct the training where I wanted it to go. And it was a great experience. And I was really grateful to them for that. But it truly has triggered a lot of passion about this topic that we're going to discuss, because the last agency I was with had a majority of officers that were retired from another agency. And so the median age was a lot different than the first agency I was with. Instead of the median age being young people in their 30s, it kind of sounds weird saying that, young people in their 30s.
We are all old now, man.
But the median age was mid 50s. And so that's, 20 years, 25 years is a huge difference in ability, and especially when it comes to training. So it's been interesting. It's been a very interesting journey. My background in strength conditioning is from my degree program. I got my first personal trainer cert probably back in 2010. And since then, just continue to study and learn, and have gone on to get, my certification through the NSCA as a CSCS. And the more I learned, like I said earlier, the more I realized that I need to keep learning, because there's so much out there that we just don't know. There's always somebody that knows more and has better experience, and it's up to us to kind of keep seeking that to just keep getting better.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And we've worked together collectively. We've all worked together in so many different capacities, and you are an excellent instructor. You resonate with the audience and who you're teaching. And I think because you come from a place, you get it, you've been there. Before we dive into the whole conversation, I want to kind of come back. So Chris and Greg, everybody's kind of knowing your law enforcement experience, but will you guys share a little bit of your physical fitness background and training?
Yeah, my physical fitness was I've lifted weights all my life. Lifted weights in high school and played a little bit of high school football. And my dad was just a little tiny strong man. He's about 5'6" and bench press over 500 pounds. And he used to own a service station back then, and had a little room in the back where he had all of his old weights, and he'd go back and lift by himself. And I remember watching him lift once, and he was he was probably lifting just over 500 pounds on a bench press, and the bar was bending, and he just, no spotter. I mean, I was just a kid, and I'm watching him, and he's just taking it off and punching it out a couple of times. And so, that was always my goal, is to be as strong as my dad. And really, as far as any cardio, there wasn't ever really a whole lot of focus on that until I got into the academy. In the academy, there's obviously a little bit of cardio because you have to start running and things like that. So that was always a challenge for me. But I did like the strength training part of it. And as I'm getting older, I'm finding that a real important thing for me is just the functional movement exercises and being able to do your everyday tasks and being strong enough to do those everyday tasks and continue being mobile and having that ability as I age. And so that's kind of been my focus lately.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, for me, I never really stepped foot in the gym. The academy is actually where I started to look into the fitness side of things, because it's the academy. We did a lot of cardio, and whenever we got in trouble, we did even more cardio. And my class was always getting into trouble, so I got plenty of cardio in the academy. But when I came out of the academy, I never stepped foot in the gym. And my agency actually, 1 or 2 years, Colten, you might remember this since we're from the same former agency, but the agency actually bought membership for all of its employees at one of the local gyms. And yeah, I never went, even though it was free. I would love that now, right? But and Colten and I, we worked together. Our careers kind of mirrored each other, and we worked undercover together. And that was the first time, because I worked with Colten, that he invited me to the gym with him. And the first time I walked into the gym, I felt uncomfortable because, there's people in there that are in shape and they know what they're doing. I have no clue. Like, I was so intimidated walking in, and Colten, being a good instructor, made sure that I was comfortable. And I kind of share this story throughout the years. He wanted me to focus on doing curls, barbell curls. And I'm like, okay, cool. And he put two, like, I want to say 5-pound plates on it, or maybe 10, could have been 5. And he wanted me to do these curls with these little minimal weights. And my ego got in the way. And I said, I'm not doing that. He goes, well, why not? I go, because there's chicks in here. They're gonna see me lifting this little bar with these little weights. No way, man. And Colton's focus was, he didn't care who was watching. His whole focus was on technique. Get the technique done correctly, because you don't need to do 1,000 of these, and you don't have to put 100 pounds of weight on this, because if you do it incorrectly, you're going to injure yourself and you're not going to make any gains. And it was really tough for me to really look at it that way. To me, it was like, no, I've got to pump as much weight as I can and look like I'm Arnold in here, because there's females in here, right? So the ego really got in the way. But from that point forward, Colten and I would go into the gyms after work and work out, and it slowly just went from there. So I became a fitness instructor, law enforcement fitness instructor, and then I later trained in mixed martial arts. And training in MMA, you learn quickly different types of workouts that will enhance your MMA training. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me, though.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. For me, I grew up in Washington and Hawaii, so I was always naturally active, but I did not really go to a gym. It can be very intimidating walking into a gym. You said, just going in as a guy, you were kind of a little bit like, oh, what's going on? As a female, it can be very intimidating. You got, not only do you not know what you're doing, but you have guys around and you don't know if they're looking at you because they want to help you or hit on you. So a lot of women won't even step foot into a gym, or if they do, they go with a buddy system, which is great, but you got to have somebody that's going to hold you accountable and help you up level. Versus, I had a friend where it was like, hey, let's go work out, and then we ended up having appetizers at a restaurant and we never made it to the gym. So but I was always naturally active. I would hike, I would surf, I would be in the water all the time, run in the beach. And then when I moved to Arizona, slowly, part of it was because I was, a new mom and then not really familiar around here, didn't know where to go. I wasn't going to go hike in the desert by myself. So over the past few years, I got more and more stagnant, and then I hit my 40s. And so since I'm going to hold down the female perspective on this, hormones are fun. We'll talk about male hormones as we get into this too. But for the females that are watching, that's a whole nother topic that we will get into, but it does absolutely impact how you need to shift your physical fitness and what you're doing, because what you were doing in your 20s is not going to work in your 40s the same. So with all of that said, I want to kind of come back to, you were talking about MMA. I recently, like very recently, just started training in Kajikembo, which is what you're trained in. And you guys talk a little bit about how mixed martial arts can help not only your physical fitness, but being on the job.
Well, really quick, Colten, I'm going to jump in here really quick. So I'm going to give the caveman version, and then you can clean it up for me. The thing I learned in training in MMA is beach muscles, those big muscles that we work out at the gym to get nice and huge and look cool with our shirts off. They don't really do much in MMA. As a matter of fact, they're going to slow you down a bit. So there's a different type of workout that I had to do. Call it fight cardio. There's long cardio where you can go on a long run, and then there's fighting cardio where you have explosive movement. And so that's kind of what I learned. Now, I'm giving the caveman version. Maybe you can clean it up a bit and use the correct terminology, because I know I probably messed it up. But what are your thoughts?
No, you explained it perfectly. So it all boils down to the intent of the training. And that's the missing piece that so many people lack or just can't seem to find when they're training. When you go to the gym, whether it is to train mixed martial arts, whether it is to hit the weights, whether it is to go do a spin class, like, what is the intent of your training that day? And when you have your intent, that helps you program and design what you want to do, because we all know that when we show up at the gym with no plan, we're not going to have that great of a workout. But what you're talking about, Chris, is a very unique sport, because in mixed martial arts, you're really having to hit both ends of the extreme spectrum, where you have to fight, in the UFC for 5 minutes. So you have to have that sustained cardiovascular ability. You also have to be able to explode with maximal effort in an instant reaction. And so then you're really hitting a whole different energy system. And so finding that balance and fine tuning the way the body works and recovers and goes into that adaptation we want when we're talking about training, it's very, very unique. And you're exactly right when you talk about the difference between hypertrophy training, which is, like you said, the beach muscle training, versus your fight, I think you call it fight cardio, which in essence is your anaerobic energy system.
Anaerobic, yeah.
And it's just, it takes a long time to train. It really does, because your body takes time to adapt. And one of the things, if we want to kind of circle a little bit back into law enforcement, think about, Greg, you talk about watching your dad work out. I think of back in, 1998, 1999, when we started our careers, we all seem to get all of our information from our action heroes, right? We've got Arnold Schwarzenegger and his encyclopedia of bodybuilding. We've watching Sylvester Stallone on Rocky, just, getting absolutely shredded. And you watch all these actors, and that's what we think we want to train for, because we're watching them on the screen with big muscles doing these dynamic things. But again, we've learned over the years that it all boils down to the intent of our training, because there's nothing wrong with getting big muscles. But like you said, Chris, that's not going to be effective in mixed martial arts because of the physical demands that are placed on the body and the training adaptation you need for big muscles versus fighting condition. So it's a huge topic, but you explained it very, very well and just kept it really simple.
Well, I like what you said is the intention. What is the intent of the workout that you're doing? Because even back then, you and I, we did infinite intensity. You remember that? And I don't know if you remember, but we were doing infinite intensity when we were running the classes for the PD, right after work. And just in doing that, I noticed my warm-ups when I was training in MMA. Before any class, you do warm-ups, right? You start working on the conditioning. And when we started training in that infinite intensity, I noticed that the conditioning portion of training wasn't a big deal to me. As a matter of fact, it was fairly easier compared to almost throwing up in most classes just to do the warm-ups, just so we can get into the fighting aspects of it. So again, like you said, it's the intention of it, and infinite intensity helped with the fight cardio. So yeah, and so the beach muscles were not a big deal to me after that.
Well, and talking about intention, so I know a lot of people focus on physical fitness, one, because we want to maintain a level of being healthy. A lot of people look at physical fitness of losing weight or weight gain or whatever that is. For the intention of this, like, we're really looking at physical fitness specifically for first responders and specifically for law enforcement. So I want to kind of walk it through, starting at the academy level. You have somebody that, like you said, Chris, before you went into the academy, you didn't really do anything. So let's talk to our rookies out there for a minute. Like, whether you hit the gym already or not, the academy is going to bring a different level of fitness into your life. It's going to give you a different awareness. And we keep bringing up MMA, and that's going to be a reoccurring conversation, because I want to hit the emphasis of, it's my personal opinion. I think all cops should be trained in MMA in some form, but we'll get into a little bit more of that as we go. But for the new people coming into law enforcement, what kind of guidance can you guys give them? What's going to maximize the benefit for them for physical fitness to stay safe and be able to show up?
Yeah, so it all boils down to what we call general preparation. So you can't expect somebody to start peaking until you build a solid foundation. It kind of goes back to the whole theory of base, build, and peak, where you've got to get the base first, which is our general preparation. When I was growing up, we played sports year round. Didn't matter. In the summer, we're out playing wiffle ball, we're kicking kickball, playing soccer. And it was not uncommon to run and jump over fences, because you got to get your ball. The dog's going to chase you, so you got to get back over. So we were in a constant state of this general preparation of doing all this physical activity. If you don't have that and you start in the academy, you have to recognize that. And the academies across the state of Arizona have done a really good job of starting to see that the old model of just let's go make everybody run miles every day doesn't work, because it does nothing to prepare the body for what you've alluded to, and the fact that we do a lot of dynamic fighting activities in law enforcement, and just running miles upon miles does not prepare us for that demand. And so academies now do a really good job of building that foundation through energy system development, through endurance-based muscular endurance, where they're putting them through specific motions to helping them build patterns that will correlate into other mechanisms of strength and conditioning, if that makes sense. For example, if you think about most of our dynamic movements, most of the movements that occur in law enforcement, whether it's fighting somebody, having to pull somebody, drag somebody, get over a wall, lift a canine over a fence, whatever it is, everything starts with the force we develop from the ground to execute that activity. So a lot of the exercises the academies are doing now are the glute bridges, a lot of kettlebell work, a lot of split squat work, a lot of sleds, all this stuff that helps develop that rate of force production from the ground. That's what we need. It does no good just to go run. Like, we actually have to start building these movements that will help us in other movements. But I don't know if that's even making sense, because I'm picturing it in my head, like how they're programming these. But you can't just go and start deadlifting mad weight until you actually know the mechanism that your body uses to lift that weight. And so academies are doing a good job of that general preparation phase of just building that foundation, which is exactly what these new recruits need.
Are the academies, they're doing a good job of putting that in there. Are they doing a good job of explaining the why, like you just did, of why you're starting there, why you're building that, so that they understand, in at least at some level, like what that's going to entail down the road? That makes sense.
Yeah, the two academies that I still have friends that work with the recruits, yes, absolutely, they do. And a matter of fact, one of them, they have gotten the recruits into even rucking, where they give them their packs and they just go and they just basically hike, for lack of a better term, because they're starting to train the body to have that load bearing on their hips as they're moving. And the military's done a really good job of actually correlating some validated studies showing the effects of general strength when you are out rucking. It's very low impact because you're not jumping, you're not bounding, you're not having really forceful footfalls because you're just marching or hiking. And it's a great general preparation exercise. So a couple of the academies that do it, I know they do explain it well, but now in Arizona, I think we're up to 18 or 19 different academies. So there's a lot that I don't know how they run them, but the ones that I'm familiar with are starting to do a really good job.
Awesome.
Well, I kind of have mixed feelings on that because, I'm glad they're doing it, but I'm disappointed that back when I started in the mid 80s, we didn't do anything like that. As a matter of fact, our gym time was limited. And we did a little bit of mat work, handcuffing techniques and pain compliance techniques that never, ever seemed to work for me. You do it in the gym and in the academy, and, you grab somebody a certain way and they go down and, oh, well, that worked. But then to try it in a practical, real environment, you grab somebody like that who's, really drunk or on drugs and they don't go down and they didn't teach you what to do after that. So it's disappointing that we didn't have that back then, but I'm really glad to hear that they're doing it now.
I like what you said too about, it's one thing to learn a technique, but the reality of actually pulling it off real time. I just did that the other day. I learned a technique and then tried to do it on Chris, and I failed miserably. It didn't work.
Well, I mean, you did the technique, but you also got to set it up, and that's the difference, with anything. It's the setup. You've got to set it up in order to use the technique, and it's explosive movement and it's surprise, right? So that's why it didn't work on me, because I knew it was coming. Right? If I didn't know it coming, maybe it would work. Colten, so when it comes to nutrition has always been my weakness, and sugar. And for the new officers that are starting a career, typically they're going to be working. Well, when they go through FTO, they don't know what they're going to be working. They're going to be working different types of shift. But typically, new officers go work the night shift. So, what's your recommendation for these new officers to prepare them for their nutrition, at work?
So nutrition correlates directly with our fitness levels and the ability to train. One of the things that we do when we're younger is we have this sense of invincibility, where for us, recovery is not that big of a deal. We can go work a graveyard shift, go straight to the gym, work out for 2 hours, go home, sleep for 4 or 5 hours, get back up, get stuff done around the house, and go into work, and just do that day in and day out. As we get older, we just can't do that. Time truly does matter when it comes to training and this profession. So one of the things with these younger officers as they start is we need to teach them a little bit more about emotional intelligence, not just from the mental health perspective, but from the physical health perspective as well. And there's a lot of peer pressure when you go to the gym. If you're training at work, if you're training in mixed martial arts with a group of people, there's a lot of peer pressure to compete and to be as good as somebody else. And we can't do that. We have to teach these new officers to do a self inventory every day before they go work out. They need to evaluate how they did on their sleep. They need to evaluate how they did on their nutrition. Did they eat McDonald's at 3 o'clock in the morning because nothing else was open? Did they slam 2 monsters throughout the shift because they're just tired and not drink any water? I mean, they have to evaluate. Okay, if they ate fairly good and they're hydrating, then that absolutely is going to help them make the decision on how to train the next day. We also have to look at just how they physically feel. There's a lot of fire departments out there right now. I know we're talking about fire, whole nother world, right? But they work 2 days in a row and have 4 days off, which is great for family. If you have to travel to work, the schedule works great. But what happens when that first 24-hour shift, you get absolutely slammed and you have to run 10 calls throughout the night, and then you've got another 24 hours of shift coming on. Part of being emotionally intelligent with your fitness and your nutrition is understanding that second day, you're not going to go to the gym and work any compound movements that might be very taxing and stressful on the body, because you're going to increase the likelihood of injury. And once we get hit with that injury, it completely demotivates us from continuing to work out, because now we have to nurse that injury and we can't do what we want to do. And so part of with these new officers is just helping them understand that it's okay to just go in and do a foam rolling session, do some yoga poses, do some meditation, walk on the treadmill for 20 minutes. Like, just, you can still get physical activity in, but be smart about how you're training based on how well you're eating, how well you're rested, and what your body feels like to have that intelligence to know the best path for success.
And that's so true. You got to listen to your body. How many times have we lifted, we're in the gym lifting, and then, for example, for me, I when I was benching, I felt a pain right in here as I'm lifting. What do you think I did? I kept lifting because I wasn't done with my sets. But when the body's saying, hey, there's pain here, that's the body's way of saying, hey, there's something wrong here, you need to stop. Because if we don't stop, what happens? We create more injury, right? So pain is essentially, it's a good thing, because it says stop what you're doing, reassess. You might not want to do that again, right? But sometimes our ego gets in the way and we keep doing it, right? And then we reach that point of injury where we can't work out anymore. And to some people, where working out is a ritual for them, if they can't work out, some people fall into a depression, right? Because sometimes it's that emotional. They're so emotionally wrapped up into it. So yeah, you got to be careful. You got to listen to your body.
And Chris, you're absolutely right with that. As far as the lifting, and then you hurt yourself, or bench pressing, and that's something I always wanted to do. I wanted to keep up with Dad, and I wanted to get strong and big and be able to lift a whole bunch of weight. And you start to hurt yourself, and in my case, both my shoulders. And I'm just going to keep lifting through it. I'm just going to keep lifting through it. And now here I am in this part of my life thinking, I probably shouldn't have kept lifting through it, but I didn't want to stop. The ego was in the way. I had a goal. I want to get stronger. I want to do this bench press, but the ego got in the way, and I didn't want to stop. And there are other things I could have done, should have done, if I would have known, and didn't do them. But it really does. You pay for it in the end. So you have to listen to your body. You have to pay attention to those aches and pains, and you have to be able to be willing to modify to do other things.
And I think that's a great, sorry. Well, a good thing, because Colten already had said too about the not competing. And so I think, especially when you're new, you're trying to, you two compete all the time. So we'll talk about that. But not competing when you're in the academy to the point that you are like, well, this is hurting, but everybody else is going. And then you try to push through that. I did a 6-week workout challenge a couple of years ago that I ended up with a group, and the girls, they were all 10, 15 years younger than me, and I'm super competitive. And because I let my ego get in the way, I was injured the entire time, and I didn't stop because I was like, no, if they, I got to keep showing up. I'm weak. If I don't, I'm, whatever. And it mentally and physically just annihilated me. It took me about 2 years to fully recover on all aspects to be able to step back into a gym. So the not competing and listening to your body, because especially in the academy, yes, you're trying to get through the academy, but realizing the mindset shift of you're not just trying to get through the academy, you're trying to set yourself up for success for a 20+ year long career. Chris, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, Colten, like, what do you recommend to somebody if they injure themselves working out, or if they feel a pain? Like, what's your suggestion for these people?
Well, I'll give you the typical attorney answer, and it depends, right? Because there is something to allowing a little bit of competition and pride, because that will push you to train harder. It's the recognition of knowing when that push or that extra effort is resulting in an injury. So there's a difference between just hurting and being injured. And I think that's a distinguishing factor that sometimes we forget. A lot of people, as soon as they are uncomfortable and hurt, they equate that with, oh, I got to stop. But that's when that drive and that's when that competition is good, because that's going to push you and you can still train very effectively. But it's when you get actually injured, that's when it's time to stop. And that's when it's time to put the brakes on. And with all the different healing modalities that are out there now, and all the research that's coming out, where it's not just about compression and ice anymore, but it's about movement, it's about blood flow therapy, it's about all these things that actually help induce healing. Take your time, listen to your body, and let your body heal. And the great thing about strength and conditioning is there are so many different variations of every exercise. Again, depending on the intent of your training, you can still train effectively with an injury by varying the exercises you're doing, the method that you're doing them, and the intent of your training. So you don't have to give up. We're all getting older. I've had a few ankle surgeries. I've got a couple herniated discs in my lower back, and I've just learned that I can still train. I just have to be smarter about it. But I'm not just going to give up, because as mentioned earlier, if I don't work out, there is a definite mental health side effect to that for me personally, because that is how I manage my stress. And that's kind of my meditation, is being in my garage, working out by myself. Even if it's 110 in the garage, it's a shorter workout, but that's my time to get in there and just do my thing to unwind.
I have a couple questions. So moving forward from the academy further into the career, do you think that there's kind of we have like the 7-year itch where you start thinking, do I want to keep going in this career? But when it comes to physical fitness, do you think that there's a point in time within the career that you start tapering off the fitness? And part of it's going to come with age, but as we get older, we start getting a little bit bigger, and we have some older officers that have gotten bigger. And I know we've talked about it behind the scenes about, you want a partner that's going to be able, if you're going to jump on a fence, they need to be able to jump the fence, and you have those that can't. So is there a point in time in the career that you kind of see maybe a pattern where that starts shifting?
I mean, for everybody, it will shift a little bit. I don't know of one person that's been able to train consistently from day one throughout their entire career, the exact same intensity, the exact same level that they were at. So it will shift for everybody. The hardest challenge with the shift is the acceptance of that shift, of being, okay, I am now 48 years old. If I go into the gym and there's a couple 24-year-old officers there, I'm not going to be able to keep up with them more than likely. And I just have to accept that, because it comes back to competing against myself. As far as just in general, not being involved in fitness, it absolutely happens, especially with life events. Whether you have kids, whether you change your schedule and your body's getting used to it, whether you're going through some mental health issues, because the first 7 years or first 10 years on the job, you experienced a lot more than you expected to experience, and you kind of get into a funk. Life happens and we get busy and we have to shift priorities. So it absolutely does happen, but I don't think it's a lack of motivation, because everybody wants to stay in shape. It's just a lack of commitment to setting aside the time, because life just gets so busy. And that's the challenge, is finding and dedicating the time to continue that.
For
And I
those
think
officers
that's where nutrition comes in as well, because over the years, and especially working graveyards or working a difficult shift, or working back-to-back shifts or extra long shifts, I think that as you go through your career, you start your nutrition drops dramatically, and you start eating terrible. You start eating, whatever fast food place are open at 1 a.m. You visit a lot of Circle K's or QTs and just eat whatever you can, and you're not eating healthy. And in the meantime, you're not exercising or working out because you're working graveyards. So absolutely, I think that's where you see a big part of the gain, and that's where a lot of my weight gain came from during the first 5 to 7 years, maybe to the first 10 years, was just trying to work with nutrition. And now that we've got so much help on the nutrition front, for the new officers and for even the seasoned officers, if we just pay attention to what's out there and start trying to incorporate it into our lives, we're going to start doing a lot better. And that's eating right, eating healthy, staying hydrated, and getting some kind of a workout in at least 3 times a week.
Yeah, Greg, nutrition, in law enforcement, the communities, they're great at supporting law enforcement for the most part. And what do they like to do? They like to drop off cookies and cake and
Say it. You can
sweets,
say it. Donuts.
donuts, right? Pizza, right? And what do cops love the most? Free food.
Yeah.
And so we have to be careful. We have to be very mindful. Just because there's food in the break room, does it necessarily mean we have to eat it? Or also, is it okay to just eat one donut if, for the most part, your nutrition is pretty good? I think it just depends on the individual. It's okay to have a cheat day in some cases, but we have to also be mindful that we're not always sitting in the break room just because there's free food in there and that we have to consume everything. Because that's one of the traps I fell into personally. Anytime there was free food, I'd get 2 platefuls and then I put them in the fridge for later, right? Because we all know how cops are. They eat everything. And even if I wasn't hungry, though, I would still eat it. Why? Because it's free. So, for the people out there listening in the community, it's okay to bring some food, but make sure, try to make it healthy for your officers. Otherwise, yeah, we're gonna have some problems.
Well, and Colten, you were talking about priorities and time. And that is one of the biggest things we hear now, especially because a lot of the departments are really, really they're having their shortages. They have a lot of mandatory overtime. They're working their people to beyond burnout. And so they don't have time, or if they do have the time, they don't have the energy to work out. So, and it's not as easy as saying, well, if you really want it, you're going to make time, because when you're working that much and you have a family, that's not going to be the priority, even though you want it to be. So I would like to hear from you, your thoughts about working out on shift, because it's kind of not a controversial topic, but it kind of is, because there are some departments that are like, yes, absolutely, here's a gym, we want to encourage you. And then others are like, no, it's a liability. And Chris and I both talk about, if you're not allowing people to work out on shift and you guys are sitting in a patrol car for, 5 hours, and then all of a sudden you just got to go from completely cold and you haven't worked out in a couple of weeks, now you're in a foot pursuit, you're going to get hurt. So what are your thoughts on all of that?
So it's an interesting question, because there definitely is a liability factor and a potential for injuries when you allow officers to work out on duty. Absolutely. However, you have to mitigate that with looking at my first statement, at the beginning of this interview. What are we doing to help build that foundation of fitness so that our officers don't get hurt in the line of duty on an actual call for service, right? So one of my good friends, he's a very, very successful, very motivating coach. And one thing he always tells his athletes is like, look, I'm not willing to risk a lot in training, but in competition, we're going to risk everything we can. And so that's kind of the same philosophy in law enforcement, right? When we're out on the street and we're in a situation where we have to save somebody or save ourselves, we're risking everything we can. We're at maximum effort, right? But when we're training, we have to learn to dial it back a little bit, because we have to build that foundation so we can perform at a maximum level. So when we allow our officers to train on duty under guidance, it's a great thing, because it's helping to encourage to build that foundation. Now, with that said, will you get injuries? Absolutely. The role that I'm actually in now is directly involved with injury reports and trying to mitigate some of those. And one of the things that we've been looking at is mandating some type of awareness or base level of knowledge and ability to be able to work out on duty. Because if you think about it, just like Chris mentioned, the first time he went to the gym, he didn't really know what to do. He kind of was overwhelmed. You go through your 4-month, 5-month, or 6-month academy, depending on which academy you go through, and you do get a little bit of foundation for training, but it may not directly correlate to what you want to do on your own. And so the last thing we want officers to do is watch the latest fad on Instagram, and they're just going to pick, or should I say TikTok? We have a younger audience now, so I'm sure they're on TikTok, not Instagram.
On the socials.
Yeah, but they're going to look
I
at,
think it's
that looks like
MySpace.
yeah. They're going to look at these influencers and be like, oh, that looks awesome. I'm going to try that. But why? Like, what's the intent? What is the intent of that particular movement that you're training? And so I think by providing a good knowledge base and showing them and giving them the resources, for example, actually building programs for them and helping guide them, it's absolutely a wonderful idea to give the time on duty for them to do that, because it really shows how much you support and encourage their physical health.
That's where you would give training, like at advanced officer training, where if an agency has it every quarter, they do some type of training. That's probably where you want to introduce it. Is that what you're recommending? Is
So I'm not sure I have an official recommendation. Like in my mind, which is again a non-expert mind, but I would think that as soon as you get out of the academy, you have this orientation class, like in some type of post-academy class, where you do introduce workshops on proper foundational movement with strength and conditioning training, because you're giving them this gym, right? You're like, hey, here is this really cool gym that's got all this equipment, everything that you need. Let's teach you how to use it effectively. I don't want you just wandering around in there picking random exercises that you saw online and then increasing the chance of getting hurt. Let's teach you how to move and make sure that you understand that. And then we're going to let you do that on duty.
Well, and I love that. And I mean, when you go to a gym outside of law enforcement or outside of the department, walking into a gym, again, it can be intimidating, but then I will skip different machines because I have no idea how to use them. And I'm not going to sit there with people possibly watching me. And then especially we have people, if you're somebody that does this, just don't. But taking videos of people in the gym because they're doing something wrong, like, stop that shit. Just like go teach them how to do it properly, because clearly they don't know. But I don't want to be that person that's like, that's not what that machine's for at all. So having a personal trainer, having a coach or mentor come in and teach you like, hey, this is the proper way where it's going to minimize injury and risk for that. I think that is absolutely great.
So Colten, the mindset that every law enforcement, if you're going to wear a uniform, wear a vest, carry a gun with you, you're an athlete, right? You are a I don't know what you want to call it, law enforcement athlete. You're doing a lot more than a professional athlete, than a collegiate athlete, because one of the things that these professionals have is they've got personal trainers for everything, right? Nutritionists, they've got everything. And when whatever sport they're in and they're competing, they don't compete cold, right? They have to do some type of warm up, some type of stretch before whatever event that it is or whatever game they're going to play. You will never see a pro athlete do anything from a cold state. But yet, how many officers will get into a full-on foot pursuit from a cold state on top of wearing additional gear? So what are your thoughts on that?
So the luxury that the majority of our community has that first responders do not have is predictability. Because as a professional athlete, as an Olympic athlete, or even just as a recreational athlete, you have a schedule. You know where you're going to be, you know what you're going to be doing, and you can schedule incrementally to adjust for whatever competition you're doing. In law enforcement, we have absolutely no predictability. And I mean, I can remember 2 or 3 cases when we were working narcs together and violent crimes together, where it was a 24 to 36 hour straight shift. Like, we did not have time to do anything other than be at work for that long. And so how do you recover from that? Because there's no predictability. We had no idea that was going to happen. So it's important to understand that we have limitations. We don't have the luxury that those professional athletes have. So we have to mitigate that unpredictability the best that we can. And it kind of goes back to your very first question about nutrition. And that's why it's so important to do the little things like prep your meals, bring a cooler with you, and have some healthy snacks in there. Because yes, you are absolutely going to have a hard time fitting in a good, wholesome eating routine without a solid set schedule. But it's possible to mitigate that by being prepared. And so I think that's where we can do a better job of, is actually teaching our officers those little tools to help them be prepared, so that if they do encounter that onset of just immediate action that's needed, well, you know what? I didn't predict it, but at least I was prepared because I've built my foundational fitness. I've built my foundation of nutrition. So I know my body's going to perform at a good level. But it's when we don't prepare and add the unpreparedness to that unpredictability, that's when we get hurt, and that's when, things don't go as planned.
And that's something we don't really think about. As a young cop, we could chase somebody and we'd be okay for the most part. Though I mean, I've done it before where I've hurt my hip chasing somebody from a cold state. And then fast forward my last year at work, we got into a foot pursuit with a guy that was armed. And I won't I won't throw any names out there, but there was an officer who, my rule of thumb is this: if I don't catch you in the first 20 feet, I'm not chasing you. I'm going to go back to my patrol car and we're going to set up a perimeter or whatever. Well, this officer decided, I don't know where he got the energy to do this, but he just would not give up chasing this guy. So of course, I can't leave him. So now I'm running, and we ended up catching the guy. However, almost immediately after we took the guy in custody, this officer said, "Hey, my body is locking up. I need to get back to the station." And so he literally was, freezing up, if you will. And he ended up going to the urgent care. He had to go and call it a day. And he went to the urgent care to go see what was happening to him. Which, again, I'm not going to name any names. We know who he is, but like, what's your recommendation, or what do you think happened there, from your level of experience?
If I were to just make an educated guess, because again, I wasn't there, but that's just probably a little bit of dehydration, a little bit of malnutrition, and he probably has not pushed himself at that level of exertion for quite some time. So his body literally freaked out, like, what are you doing to me right now? I am not prepared for this at all. I'm going to shut down because I don't want you to do anything else that's going to cause me to get hurt. It's kind of that whole self-defense mechanism kicking in, or self-preservation, sorry, that the body, kind of goes through.
Well, I think that's a great segue. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Segue into, towards the end of your career. Now you're older. Your body's not so used to it. You probably aren't working out as intense, or frequently as you did. And it takes a lot longer to recover from everything. You can, you sleep wrong on your pillow and you're down for 3 days. So, as we move through the career, I want to hit one point too, because we know a lot of people that have lower back issues, hip issues, and because you're wearing a heavy belt for years and years. But not only do you have the belt, you're sitting in a car a lot of time. Chris, you talk about this with the muscles, and you're always twisting this way, but very rarely this arm's getting suntan and you're twisting your body this way. But how often are you consciously moving to get it back to balance and getting out and stretching? So let's kind of talk about the importance of, stretching, especially when you're older. Yoga, look, so many people are like, oh, I'm not going to do yoga, but yoga. And then what is your take for, helping kind of combat all of the muscle tension?
Well, I'm going to have to remind myself to listen to myself on this one, because I do not stretch nearly enough. No, as you get older, the importance of warming up in your routine absolutely is vital. And with one of the companies that I work and teach for, we have a contract with the Navy, and the Navy, if anyone's familiar with their system for training, it's actually really, really good. It's called NOFS, Navy Operational Fuel and Fitness Systems. It's really good because it really addresses your warm up and getting your body activated and prepared, not just physically, but neuromuscularly as well, because you know that in order to move efficiently, there is that neural connection between your brain and your muscles to work and move when asked in an efficient manner. And so it's really important to focus on that warm up, because we don't, like you said, when we're at work in a car, we can't warm up. So when we're training, we need to make sure that we're doing all those things so that our body can recover and be ready to move when the time comes. But after the workout, I think is probably one of the most critical times that we neglect. Oftentimes when we're done working out or we're done training, it's just, hey, I'm going to the car, or nope, I'm going to jump in the shower. Take at least 5, if not 10 minutes, and going through a couple yoga poses is amazing. Get out your foam roller, do some self-myofascial release, just get the muscles pliable into that recovery, focus on breathing. But yes, absolutely, stretching and cooling down after that workout is just as important as warming up to prepare for it.
And that's a good point because, as a yoga instructor here, the like Tami said earlier, the position that a lot of patrol officers will sit in a majority of their shift is they're in a seated position, right? And the MDC is going to typically be to their right. And so a majority of the time they're doing this, right? And they're typing on their MDC, their arms are over here, and they're doing this. And the right side of the body is compressing while the opposite side is stretching. And then what happens? Then they get back to this position, the driving position, but they neglect to stretch this side, right? And so what's happening is they're creating this imbalance in the body. So you got to be mindful. If I'm doing this, I'm going to have to stretch this way. And in yoga, we're always focusing on both sides of the body. We cut it in half. Whatever I do on this side, I'm going to do on this side to create the balance. And even if we're driving and we're constantly looking over this direction, what's happening? I've got to stretch. I've got to look over here at some point as well. Little things like that can make a big difference. Even just sitting in the patrol car for hours in that seated position, pull over, get out and walk around, go and talk to somebody, or, get that blood flowing, because there have been shifts where I've sat there and nothing is happening, and I'm being lazy, and I'm being antisocial, and I don't really want to talk to anybody or make any traffic stops. So I could ride an entire shift for 7 hours sitting there, right? And ideally you don't want to do that as a cop, but there are some days where you do feel that way. But you got to be mindful. You got to get that blood flowing. You got to get that body moving.
And so, okay, I want to circle back to MMA and the importance of having additional training so that you are confident and we can talk a little bit about what you guys do in DT, but your take on MMA, because from perspective, just seeing some of the things that are going out on body cam across the country, there's a lot of newer officers that are very quick to go for a weapon, whether it's a gun or a taser, usually taser first. And to me, it's like, could that have been avoided had they had some sort of experience and knowledge of how else they could have handled that situation? And I thought that having some sort of martial arts training was just kind of like par for course. And then when I got into this more, realizing that's not, a lot of officers don't have any training in that. I'm like, I think it should be mandatory. That's just my opinion. So what is your guys' take? How can that help keep officers and everybody safe?
Well, Colten, you've got the background. You're a fitness instructor, you're a DT instructor, and you're a firearms instructor. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it kind of boils down to a perfect world, right? Because in a perfect world, yes, we would make sure that every single officer is proficiently trained in all areas of use of force, which includes, firearms, defensive tactics, physical fitness, right? You got this whole trifecta of things that make your job, make your job tasks vital, right? And unfortunately, where do you allow the time to do that? Because as you have experienced, Tami, like, to actually be proficient in mixed martial arts takes years. There was a very large state agency, I won't name which agency, but over the last couple of years, they really started getting into jujitsu, and they mandated quarterly training for every single officer. And they found that they were getting a lot of injuries by having this mandatory training, because it goes back all the way to the beginning of where are they with building the foundation of fitness for these officers. Because if you don't have a foundation of fitness and you immediately jump into grappling, wrestling, mixed martial arts, you're increasing the likelihood of injury. And once you get injured doing that, what's your immediate reaction going to be the next time you have to go back into train? You're going to be like, I'm not going to do that. I got hurt last time. And so I would love, like I said, in a perfect world, it would be amazing to have every officer go through jujitsu, mixed martial arts. I mean, just provide a wrestling foundation. But unfortunately, it's a balance because it takes time and it takes dedication. I would love to see more of it, but at the same time, you're always going to have pushback because if you look at the vast majority of officers that we're hiring, they they all have different likes and dislikes. They all have different athletic abilities. They all have different coordination abilities. And so you have to find kind of that sweet spot of what to give them to be successful without overwhelming them or making them hate training to where they never want to do it again, which is then going to correlate to the street where they're like, I'm not trying that. I got hurt when I tried that. So I'm just going to either not help or, like you said, Tami, they're immediately going to go to a tool that provides a less lethal option. So yeah, it's a tough question to answer, like where that sweet spot is.
Chris, what's
Yeah,
your...
and that's a good point. I mean, I personally like MMA because you've got a little bit of jujitsu in there. You've got boxing, you've got wrestling, you've got all these different disciplines in one system versus you're just focusing on jujitsu. And I've been to some police trainings where it's a jujitsu training, but they train for uh competition. It's sport training that they're training for. They're training you for a mat. They're not training you for the street. You're not gonna pull guard on somebody in the street or on a sidewalk, because if you pull guard on somebody, that person's probably going to slam the back of your head into the sidewalk. It may work in a jujitsu gym, but it's not going to work on the street. So you have to have a basic understanding of how. Now, don't get me wrong, jujitsu is great. It's great because especially if you can recognize certain attacks, you can do counters. And I'm a DT instructor, so I have a little bit of background in that. But you've got to be able to make it so it works for the officers, that it works on the street.
Before I started law enforcement, I did a little bit of karate training for maybe about a year, and was in a gym and started working out, and worked out with a guy who was one of these natural bodybuilders. And so I started learning a little bit about the importance of protein and how to work out and how to lift properly. But that was maybe a year and a half at the most, and again in the academy was very little self-defense. They didn't teach us a whole lot of defensive tactics, just some basic, like I said, pain compliance moves, and but no, other than that, that was about the extent of it.
Greg, you came from Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, and I've worked with some MCSO that lateraled over to Gilbert, and I noticed all of them were bigger guys, and in the gym they like to lift. And I asked one of them, like, hey, why do you lift so much? Like, and he goes, because I came from MCSO, we never had backup. Yeah. So I had to look as big as I could, and I had to get as big as I could to discourage anybody from fighting me. And I thought, that's a great reason to get beach muscles, right?
Yeah.
Because if you can intimidate, I don't want to say intimidate, but if you can deter somebody from attacking you because you look like you're in shape and that you can take care of business, why not? Right?
Yeah.
Good.
Well,
because you guys never had backup.
No.
That's also interesting too, because I was just having a conversation about this. As you get older, you do get a little bit bigger, and yes, hormones and all of that, but you also are just kind of subconsciously appearing larger, so that as you're older, you don't want to chase, you don't want to fight, you just be like, no, we're not going to do this. And so there's kind of an actual psychological point of that. So I want to move. There's a couple more points I want to wrap up on. Moving through retirement. You guys are all retired at least once. So what would you guys have for your retirement workout? I know all you guys, so I have a little bit of cheat code, because I know that you guys all actively work out probably more now than you were before. But what is some of the guidance you have as, you come out, you retire? What's the fitness plan?
Well, I'll start with that one, if you don't mind, Tami. Is that, I struggled with retirement. for the first few years, I struggled with retirement. That's a whole nother topic that we'll talk about. But during that struggle, I've always been struggled with my weight a lot, and I've always been up and down and trying to keep that under control. And after I retired, it really ballooned up. All the other issues that I was going through and trying to deal with retirement and who I am now. I wasn't working out, I wasn't eating right, and got pretty heavy. And I'm proud to say that now this is a body by Colten. Thank you, Colten. About a year and a half ago, ish. Colten and I got together, and he kind of changed my whole philosophy and my outlook on lifting. I still wanted to lift heavy because there's still that ego in me that wanted to lift heavy. And I had a goal, and that goal was to join the 300 bench press club. And at 60 years old, I finally hit it. But that was my only really heavy goal. And Colten, when he first started with me, was lighter weights, functional movement. You need to be able to do this. And making sure that I had that base. And I haven't stopped since the day we got together. I haven't stopped. And other than maybe some medical issues throughout the year and a half or so, I haven't stopped. And then shortly after, started working with Kim Cairns, our nutritionist, and I've gone in that year and a half. I'm down, I think, about 22 pounds and continuing to trend down. And I'm not, and even if I'm not seeing it so much on the scale, I'm certainly feeling it in my clothes, and I'm having to buy smaller and smaller clothes. But I owe a lot of that to Colten and that base that he helped remind me of. And it's just you got to do it. You got to get up and you got to do the work. And that was my biggest thing. Is just I can tell you every single day I wake up and I am not motivated to work out, because I work out in my garage like Colten does, and I work out better in the heat. But when it gets to be 106, 110 in that garage, I still have to go out and get my workout done. And boy, I piss and moan and drag my feet about it, but I'm gonna get it done. And I finally am going to get out there, and I'm going to do my routines and change them up. And Colten had mentioned the influencers on social media. Oh my gosh, there's millions of them. And all of these guys are big, huge steroid using muscle men, and they're all trying to tell you how to do new workouts. And I would just have to say, don't listen to them. Stick to the basics. Don't go too heavy. Get your functional movements in. Learn how to do it right. Watch your form. And that's a big one for me, after talking to Colten, is trying to get my form right and making sure that I'm hitting the muscle groups that I'm trying to hit. And I'll give you a quick example. I saw one of those influencers, and he was doing a new exercise that I'd never seen before. And I thought, well, that might be interesting. I'll give that a try. Well, it required a reach up and a pull down. Well, I wasn't using a whole ton of weight, but when I did the pull down, I dislocated some ribs, and I was down. I mean, I was like, take me to the hospital. I'm in pain. And it took over probably 3 weeks to finally get that pain gone. And it's like, okay. And I could have done the same exercise, worked the same muscle group, just doing the basics and not doing this newfangled thing that he was doing. So be very, very cautious on those social media influencers. And they just, they didn't get looking like that by doing that exercise. They got looking like that from doing the basics and then whatever supplements they're taking. But just be careful when you listen to those and watch those guys. Take a little bit, use what works for you, stick to the basics.
Yeah, and I'd say for me, not having an ego, not having these gym wars that I used to have with these 20-year-olds. And I would have in my head, this is kind of funny, but if I was curling, let's say 50 pounds, I'd see a 20-year-old kid who would curl 60 pounds. And I'm like, oh, you're trying to outdo me, huh? So then I put, I do, 65, and then they do 70, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then before I knew it, I'm in a gym war. And I remember one time I came home, I was still married at the time. I told my wife, I go, hey, some 20-year-old punk tried to outlift me, but I beat him. And I need something for my back because I jacked up my back. And she goes, and I remember her words. She goes, that 20-year-old punk doesn't even know you're alive. And she was right. Because in my head, I was creating this fictional war, gym war with this kid who had no idea I was even existed. So for me, going into the gym, just doing my thing, not having an ego, doing a lot of body weight. I don't lift heavy anymore, uh, which that was a big thing for me. So now mainly just body weight, get on the treadmill, maybe get on the bike. I might walk, you know, or I might run. If I do some running, I don't like running on a treadmill, so I may run around in my neighborhood. But I took up yoga because of that, because yoga helps with strength, stability, flexibility, and mobility, and it allows for me to stay somewhat active. So yeah, putting the ego in check was really big for me. Colton, what do you got?
Well, it all boils back down to what is your expectation? What are you training for? And what is your intent? As we transition out of law enforcement, or as we get older and just can't physically do the things that we used to be able to do, it's what do you expect of your results? Like, what are you training for? Why are you in there? And just having a clear goal is probably the most important thing. Just simply understanding your limitations. And we didn't even, I mean, we could do a whole nother episode just on program design and how we should be working out and how we should structure work days versus rest days and what we should be doing to maximize recovery. But that's like a whole nother episode there. But one of the things that I really like to teach, and it's not a new principle, but it's the aggregation of marginal gains, known kind of as the 1%. This was a concept that was made really popular by the British cycling coach. And what they talk about is finding those areas of improvement where you can be just 1% better. Like he would look at this coach for the British cycling team would look at how they trained. He'd look at their equipment. He'd look at everything they're doing, their nutrition, their sleep patterns, and he would look for little, small, tiny things they could do better. And he even went as far as doing research on pillows and making sure the team traveled with pillows to try and just get that 1% better in recovery and sleep. And that's kind of the mindset that we need to have as we get older and as we come out of this career is what are we training for? Let's look at what we're training for. If we have areas we need to improve in, let's just find something and just do something 1% better. You talked about power rings earlier, or I'm sorry, donuts, right? You said that, hey, it's okay to have a donut. Well, you know what? I wouldn't argue with that, right? But if you're trying to get better, how can you make that 1% better? Well, let's just eat half the donut, or let's limit something else. Or if we're going to have that full donut, well, let's increase our protein. Let's increase our hydration, and let's add an extra 5 minutes, of that interval-based cardiovascular training. Like just always find room to do something a little bit better. And that's the most important thing to focus on as we're getting older and as we transition out of this career.
And that little bit, because like Chris, I'm going to just put you out there, but he's trying to get off of the soda, right? And so he, consciously we go out to eat. He always would order something, but he's been much more mindful with that. But then for me, I picked up like the mini cans where it's like, we're not cutting you off cold turkey and making you, but we're going to take it down a little bit and we're going to phase it out so that it's just a natural progression instead of having that lack of like, oh no, who am I, whatever. And then Colton, I want to thank you too. So for me, when I did that workout challenge, like I said, it physically injured me. I'm very, very thick-skinned and strong-minded, strong-willed, and it broke me mentally for a while. Like I had a hard time even going into a gym. And then my intention in the beginning was to lose weight. I had gained, we had the COVID-10, I had the 40. I had all of these issues. Like all of a sudden, everything I was doing, I was gaining weight, and getting more and more depressed about it. So my original goal was to lose weight, and that I failed miserably on everything that I tried. We've had many, many conversations. One of the things that happened is I realized my hormones are a big part of it. I also realized I have some issues that I needed to go slow down and go back to the very basics. And I went to a physical therapist and worked on why am I having so much back pain, hip pain? and not able to do these moves. I can't do a lunge to save my life. And it was because I found out my root was my abs were not firing. I had an emergency C-section when I had my daughter, and my abs never went back the way that they were supposed to. My core was shot. So I had to slow all the way back down, rebuild my core very slowly, and then continue over the past few years where my intention and clarity is no longer about losing the weight. That's going to be the added benefit. But for me, I need to get my body back into being just able to live the next 50 years and not be in pain. And so slowing back down to the root with all of that and going back to the basics. So I had to go all the way back to the beginning, which that was a blow to the ego for sure. But then strengthening from the base up and not competing, but competing with myself to the point where 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to walk into a gym. And then I started kickboxing and I was doing okay. I know that I'm not great at it, but I at least have been showing up. I cry on the mat. It's a whole thing. I show up. And then, to the point where 2 weeks ago when I started Kajikembo and I walk in and it's 3 black belts, me with my too big, rolled up sleeves. Chris had to tie my belt for me. I don't know what I'm doing, but let's go get on the mat with 3 black belts and see what happens here. So I want to thank you for, you're such a great instructor, and you humble everybody to a point where it's not a humbleness against the ego. You bring us back to where it's going to set everybody else up for success. So thank you for helping all of us, and thank you for being here. Do you guys have anything else you want to throw in before we wrap it up?
Thank you, Colten. Thank you for all the help and for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Colten, and come back on. We'll talk about more stuff.
Yes, definitely do much. You can come on as much as you want, please. We'd love to have you. So
I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you having me. It's an important topic, and and it does make me feel good to see that at least some of the things I've said over the years help a little bit, because that's really what it's all about. So I love helping wherever I can, and so yeah, thanks for letting me be on here.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and until next week.